Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. So I have been making some adjustments with filming because I've been so busy. So hopefully I can get back on the roll of things. So this is the first of a couple of videos that I'm sitting down and filming to try to even out my schedule in terms of like bulk filming and stuff like that, which usually I don't do, but I need to start doing more of. But anyway, so as you can see from the title of this video, I'm here today to talk about series that I refuse to finish. These are series that I just have no interest in finishing. The series may be too long, I may have disliked the first book, or it's been so long that I literally just have no interest in making it happen. So this is a pretty extensive list. I do not own any of these books, ironically. All of these books that I've read are books that I've either gotten rid of or I've listened to on audio or what have you. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the first series that I have on my list is Missions of Love, which, if you did not know, I talked about this a little bit on my best and worst books of 2021 so far, and this was a manga series that I decided that I was going to pick up and start for the 30 and 30 challenge that was being hosted by Izzy, Tamika, and Shay, and I got 2 volumes in, DNF'd because of the fact that there is some incest going on between a pair of cousins. I'd said that if this was a historical piece, I would have kind of, moved past that a little bit, but this definitely was not. It is about a young woman who writes these like phone stories, so these quick instant stories that a lot of the characters can like read on their phone, and they start to note that she never includes romance in her books, and that's because she's never experienced romance. So in order to get better at it, she decides that she wants to experience romance for the first time herself, and it ends up being a very interesting situation. I was liking it, but then the incest piece came and I was like, no, I'm good. I don't think I want to continue the series. The next one that I have on here is A Lion in the Mouth series by Kenya Wright. I ended up reading the first book, Dirty Kisses, because Tamika asked me to be a part of her taboo book club, and I agreed, and we read it, and I think we both gave it around 3.5, 4 stars, somewhere in that ballpark. And actually what was supposed to happen is myself, Heather, Tamika, and Izzy were all supposed to do a buddy read of the second book to continue the series, and none of us could get into it. So at that point it was like, yeah, I guess we're not finishing the series. And it was my first like Russian mafia type of book, or it was like my first mafia if you don't really include street lit, because street lit is like, it is like mafia, to be honest with you. It's just different terminology that's used, but this is my first like Russian mafia book, and I did end up liking it, but the second one just was not it. So I am not interested in continuing the series at all. The next one that I have is the Nancy Drew Diaries by Carolyn Keene, which is a pseudonym, I believe. So I decided that I wanted to go through and read the Nancy Drew Diary series because, why not? I work a lot with children and youth related materials, so I thought it could be fun if I just kind of flew and binged the series, especially since they're really short. I was going to listen to them all on audio. They're all under like 3 hours, or the max that they are is 3 hours. But this first one was such a bad taste in my mouth that I just opted not to continue the series at all. I just didn't feel like it was worth it at the end of the day. This series seems to be a little confused on what the target age demographic is, and I think that the mystery was not well written. It wasn't executed well, so I'm gonna leave this to the kiddos to read Nancy Drew Diaries. I just have so much other stuff to read that I'm not going to push myself through a series that 9 times out of 10 I'm not going to enjoy. The next one that I have on the list is the Menagerie series by 2T Sutherland, which is so interesting because I read the first book of the series last year around October-ish. If you did not know, I'm a huge fan of T. Sutherland's Wings of Fire series. Huge hit amongst a lot of like younger readers, but adults too. Like if you're into middle grade, you like fantasy, you like dragons and like stories told from the perspective of dragons, Wings of Fire is definitely a series that I would recommend checking out. But this particular series is about this family that runs this zoo or menagerie that has all these like magical, fantastical creatures in it, and the premise sounded really good, but then when I got into like the meat of the book, it drags. It drags so much, and I was like, this is not what I would expect from T. Sutherland, especially after reading the Wings of Fire series and loving so many of those books. I was expecting kind of the same like fast-paced energy and just a lot of adventure and high stakes and intrigue, but I didn't get that out of this one, so it was a super letdown for me. It was still a solid book, but honestly, I think that I would rather focus my time on reading her Wings of Fire series than trying to read the Menagerie series. So it may be one I revisit, but right now I'm kind of like shelving it as one that I'm not going to continue. The next one is the Sinners of Saints series by L.J. Shen. The first book in the series is Vicious, and I read this when I had the Audible like romance thing that they got rid of in November of last year. So Audible Escape, yes, that's what it was. So I had the Audible Escape subscription, and I kept hearing a lot about Vicious and people talking about LJ Shen. I know there's a lot of controversy that has surrounded LJ Shen and reviewers, but I think this was prior to all that coming out, and I had picked up the book, and it was middle of the road. It wasn't anything special. I didn't really care. It's a bully romance. It felt very new adult-ish, but it also felt very cookie cutter, like nothing spectacular about it necessarily. I think that I gave it around like a 3.5 star rating, but it didn't make enough of an impression for me to be like, oh, I want to continue the rest of the series. I just couldn't take much more of some of the characteristics of some of the characters, so I'm just kind of gonna leave that one alone. And of course, I had to add Twilight to this list. Duh. I mean, how could I not add Twilight to this list? Now, technically, I have read everything that Stephanie Meyer has put out in terms of the Twilight series. So I read the original 4, I've read the new one, Midnight Sun. If you have any questions about how I feel about Twilight, I will leave my full-length series non-spoiler review up in the card symbols above. But listen, I heard through the grapevine, I don't know how true this is, that she was planning on writing more books in the Twilight universe. I don't care. I have so many issues with the series. I have so many issues with her. And you know what? Regardless of how I feel, like the woman's going to sell 1 million copies in a week, hands down, easily, because nostalgia kicks in for a lot of people and they, you know, get super excited about it. So, but for me, I think that I inflicted enough trauma on myself last summer reading through the entire Twilight series. It just was not... Oh goodness, I will never do that to myself again. So the next one that I have on here might be a little surprising to some people, but I actually did review this one. It wasn't a standalone review, it was in a wrap-up. I can't tell you what wrap-up, but it was in a wrap-up, and it is the Nightmareverse series by L.L. McKinney. And the first one in this series is A Blade So Black, which I did read last summer, and I didn't really enjoy it. It's supposed to be kind of like Alice in Wonderland meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Main character is a young black girl, but I had a lot of issues with the lack of world building. I had issues with like the pacing and some things that did not make sense in terms of like there was an introduction of grief that I don't think was handled very well in terms of like our main character processing and dealing with their grief. So unfortunately, like, I was really excited to start this series. I follow L.L. McKinney on Twitter and everything, but this is just not for me, and it may be for someone else, but I just particularly did not enjoy the first book. So I am not going to push myself to continue the series. So the next one that I have on this list is the American Royals series by Catherine McGee, and I read the first one. I actually really enjoyed, or thought the first one was a solid read. It has a really interesting premise in which George Washington would have never become president, but instead he would have become a king, and then it would have created America's own royal line. And it's told from like 3 different perspectives. One young lady that's about to become the, or maybe it's 4 perspectives. It's either 3 or 4 perspectives, but I know one is definitely from the perspective of one of our main characters is about to become queen, which is a first in the entire history of this line. And then I think there's a perspective from her sister, and then there is a perspective from a family friend, and I can't remember whether the royal guard had his own perspective or not. I can't remember. So like I said, that first one, solid read, 3.5. I had some issues with it not really addressing how slavery and the treatment of Native and Indigenous people would have fit into the conversation of this. I don't know whether it's addressed in later editions, but I feel like that was one of my main hiccups with it. So I actually ended up putting the second one on hold on audiobook at my library. Started it and it was so dry. It was so dry and boring, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I'm just not that pressed to continue the series. It's just really not that important to me at this moment. So I think I've kind of just made that decision where it's like, you know, for the first book, solid read, interesting premise, but I don't necessarily have any high stakes in completing the series. The next one that I have is it's like the Sea Witch series by Sarah Henning. And this one I read, I believe, maybe in 2019. I can't remember if I read it in 2019 or 2020. More likely 2019. And this is kind of like a Little Mermaid retelling, except it's from the perspective of what would be Ursula, because she's the sea witch, and there's a reason why she becomes a sea witch, and it's her story. It's not a hardcore like retelling, but you could definitely get like Little Mermaid vibes from it. And the first one was probably like a 2.5, 3-star read. So at that point, if it's not like a solid introduction to a series, I'm probably not going to finish it, because if I don't like the first book, I'm not going to push myself to finish the rest, which is the case with a lot of these. A lot of these I've read the first book and it just didn't do it for me, so why continue with the series at all? The next one that I have is the 7 Magics Academy by Rochelle Workman. I read the first one in this series, and it's an indie published series, and it's supposed to be like Snow White retelling meets vampires, which I was like, this actually could be pretty interesting depending upon like how she executes everything. This could be really, really, really cool, except it wasn't. I think I gave this like a 1 or 2-star rating. It was one of the worst books that I read in 2019, and I just felt like, in terms of pacing, character development, finding a solid plot line, because it was just like all over the place. There was like 3 or 4 plot lines going on, and I was like, this makes no sense. I felt like there was some slight cultural appropriation going on with Japanese culture specifically, and it was just a hot mess. So yeah, this is one I definitely like, no, like we're not going to do this. I'm not going to do that to myself whatsoever. The next one that I have is I don't know if it's popular or not in the romance community. I haven't really heard many people talk about it. I think I've heard like 1 or 2 romance booktubers talk about this series before, and it's older, and it's the Hashtag series by Cambria Herbert, and I read the first 2 books in the series. So the first one I think I liked for the most part. It's kind of like your stereotypical, you know, nerd falling in love with a jock type of thing. So I like the first one. I went into the second one and I got so frustrated because it dealt with like football recruitment and just playing football in general. And it was very clear from the writing of this book that no research had been done in terms of like how the sport's played and how the recruiting process works. So for it to be a sports romance, I was really agitated because I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I think there was things like the running back was tackling someone and it wouldn't have made sense because a running back is offense, so he should be getting tackled, not making tackles of the other team having possession of the ball. That means you would have had two offensive teams on the field at the same time, which makes no sense. So clearly there was just so much going on there in terms of like poor research that I was completely turned off from the series, because this is a sports romance. One of your main characters, your hero, plays football, yet from writing the second book, you have no idea how the sport itself is played. So yeah, I can't do it. I refuse to do it. The next one that I have on this list is the Beautiful series by Jamie McGuire. So not only am I not continuing the series because the first book was horrible, as was the second book and the novella for this series, but also Jamie McGuire has clearly outed herself as a pure racist, so we're not going to even deep dive into that. There's been a lot of tweets and things that she said that are egregious, and I refuse to even entertain her foolishness. But outside of that, The Beautiful Disaster, I believe, is the first book, and I remember rereading that book and feeling like the toxic behavior of our hero was just out of control, that I felt like the relationship borderlined abuse if it didn't cross that line, and I felt like she was romanticizing a very toxic and borderline abusive relationship. So for me right there, reading that as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I can't subscribe to this because it's not a healthy relationship, and the unhealthy aspects of the relationship are never addressed. I can understand writing an unhealthy relationship and then having your characters acknowledge that the relationships or the relationship that they have is not healthy, and that they need to either seek help together or seek help individually and get things worked out. I have no problem with that, but it's never addressed. Like, it's actively avoided. It's never addressed. She never acknowledges it. She never has her characters acknowledge it. So that, conflated with the fact that I feel like she's racist, you know, Jamie McGuire is kind of like, she's out of here. So the next series that I have is the Imperium series by Claire Legrand, and the first book in this series is Fury Born, and I read this book because there was a lot of hype surrounding it, and it's like a 500-page book, and I was pissed. I was pissed because I felt like the book was extremely predictable. I wasn't a huge fan of the bisexual representation, and it was just so clear how the story was going to work out in the end. So I made the decision not to continue with the series, although I've heard amazing things about Claire Legrand's other works, so I'm still interested in checking those out. So the next two I feel like I'm going to talk about together because they fit into a certain era of YA, and that's the Maze Runner series and the Fifth Wave series. So these two came out when dystopian books were like the height of YA. It was a lot of dystopian stuff that just kept coming out and coming out and coming out and coming out. And these both gained some serious traction. They both got movie adaptations, and I read them both only because I had to for a YA lit class when I was getting my master's in library information science. Now, these books are books of their time. I believe that they hold a place in YA in terms of like its historical significance, but I have no interest in time traveling back to YA then. It is definitely an era that deserves its respect because it is part of the history, like I said, of YA. But I feel like that wave has come and gone, and I don't have any particular interest in revisiting it. I don't care how these books end. I wasn't 100% invested in learning how they ended. I think I actually gave both of them either 3.5 or 4 stars. So they were solid reads, and I was reading these back in maybe like 2017, 2018. So for them to still have, you know, some level of decency in terms of like enjoyment for me personally as a reader says a lot, but it wasn't enough for me to continue. So these are definitely books of their time, books that I think that probably, from what I hear about Book Talk, these may be getting a revival because, you know, Book Talk reads books from 5 years ago. So I mean, they may pick up again, but I just will not finish them. The next one is going to hurt a lot of people's feelings because a lot of people love this series, and it's An Emperor in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I just could not get into the series. The first book just didn't do it for me. It just was not a series for me. I think it was the romance. I think it was the plot development, and I just couldn't buy into the series. I know that the fourth one of this one, if I think that's the conclusion, just came out either early this year or late last year, and a lot of people have been hype for that fourth book, and I have friends who love this series, who love the fourth book. I just was not one where I was like super invested in it. So unfortunately for me, this is not a series that I plan on continuing at all. I had the first and the second book. I gave away both of those books because I was like, I'm not going to hold it on my shelves if I have no intention on finishing the series at all. These can go to a better home and to someone who enjoys Sabaa Tahir as an author. Now that I don't enjoy her as an author, like as a human, as a person, I think she's great, but I just could not get into her series. It just was not for me. And the last one that I have on this list is the Sherlock Holmes series by Brittany Cavallaro. Unfortunately for me, I think that this series started off great. It's like a Sherlock Holmes, not necessarily a retelling, but it's descendants of Watson and Holmes, and the two of them meeting at boarding school and solving these cases together. And the first one I thought was a solid read, but when I went to go pick up the second one, I was like, this is dry and boring. I don't care. It's not interesting. I think that it's going to become extremely repetitive, and I wasn't really enjoying the character development at that point. So I made it through part of the second book and ended up DNFing it, and I was like, I probably am not going to pick this up again, so I'm just going to not finish the series. If I'm not mistaken, there are 4 books in the series as of now, but yeah, it just is not for me, unfortunately. But I know that there are people out there who definitely do enjoy the series. All right, y'all, so those are some series that I do not plan on continuing. If there are any series that you don't plan on continuing, let me know in the comment box below. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, and if you want to follow me on social media or support the channel, all those links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.